Health tech and med tech has always been on taking care of the patient, but especially in the last couple years, it's focused on, and I can tell you this from the C-level suite, outcomes, access, and value. Outcomes on the procedure or the interaction with the patient. Access, more and more underserved populations, but also accessing the patient, and more in the last sort of 14 months, the telehealth component and how that has changed access, because access used to be a one-way street. Can I get to a center of care, a hospital, a doctor's office? But that has changed dramatically. And then value. Value forward and value-centric spend, and what am I getting out of that dollar that I put into play into the environment. So a couple things to keep in mind as overall themes today. Look, the patient consumer is always on, and that means that there's data coming off that patient or that consumer. Chronic care versus acute care markets. We'll cut into that a bit too. There's a very large push from the startups, the investment dollars, and the strategics on the management of chronic care. A push into healthcare and not a pull into treatment. Historically, medtech is looked at and thought about as fixing a broken person or a chronic issue, but now we're starting to get a preemptive mindset with patient monitoring, passive patient monitoring, and active patient monitoring. The finance and economics, what is driving behaviors right now, and how will that impact the supply chain? And supply chain is starting to move into a digital supply chain. So it's not going to be extruded catheters and secondary operations and inventory. We've moved into a SaaS type model. And I do believe that there's an effect on supply chain there. And then finally, the entry of personal health tech and intelligent consumer products coming in that, in my personal opinion, and some of the ways the winds are blowing right now, I do believe that there's going to be a new category coming out of not necessarily cleared or approved medical devices by the FDA, but there will be a category coming out of, let's call it, data that is better than an off-the-shelf device. And I think that's going to serve outcomes, access, and value. So let's look at the tail that's wagging the dog. 18% of our US GDP is in the healthcare marketplace. That's a lot of money. That means that there's a lot of interest there. And 90% of that is of investment money, and the spend is in the care of chronic patients and chronic management. So per the CDC, 90% of the nation's $3.8 trillion in annual healthcare expenditures are for people with chronic mental and health conditions. Heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, obesity are some of the biggest contributors. All of those allow us to be empowered to serve off premises of a hospital. When you think about chronic care, oftentimes we index towards acute care from a mindset. And the monolithic acute care structures are slowly being addressed. A lot of these illnesses can handle the monster when the monster's tiny. And what we're going to see is a telehealth, a telematics, and an off-premises treatment of these chronic diseases. And what we're going to do is going to start to see specialty sort of focus factories emerge, and we're seeing that already. And we'll jump into the ASCs a little bit, and that is going to tremendously disrupt the sales process. We're seeing it already in the large cap companies. There's a lot thrown up in the air here with the leverage of bundling that's taken place over the years on these commodity type products. Private equity starting to come in right now and start to hit on that wall of the bundling. And in fact, you might even see some court cases coming up in the next 12 to 24 months in that area. So in this past year, challenge for medtech acquisition has been identifying innovations with significant market potential. We all know the size of the multi-billion-dollar markets of orthopedics, heart valves, surgical robotics, imaging, and most of those have been indexing towards acute solutions. That's been the focus over the last decade. When you look at those markets, some of it is because of an aging population, some of that is because of market share, and there's a large sort of fulcrum there, but now that's starting to become markets that are at threat because they all revolve around making things, and acute care, where, as we see from the pure numbers, the management of chronic care, and especially with the new administration we have in, I think you're going to see an over-indexing and an over-investment towards that. The behaviors we're seeing right now is we're not looking to replace a doctor, but instead how to better connect with a doctor and provide them with more pertinent data from a preemptive perspective versus dealing with a chronic patient, an acute patient in a very specific situation. So we're starting to get a large system of connected data and data sets. Now, we're not going to see the same healthcare continuum we have today. You are going to start to see specialists inserted in between the classic healthcare continuum. So as we look at this, doctors are very busy. You're not going to be able to put a heavier load on that doctor. What we want to do is triage the information that gets to that doctor, and we can do that through new services and/or people introduced using accumulated data, data aggregated on a home front, in your workplace, in your car, a connected patient. So smart digital technologies and data that will offer predictive analytics for us to offer predictive insights to a patient. McKinsey came out with a report that said they're seeing 50 to 175 times the number of patients via telehealth that they had done before. That is an important behavior that's changed. We've seen telehealth, we've seen virtual healthcare tinkered with before the pandemic. With the pandemic, we have now seen, I just had my first telehealth visit with my doctor just about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. It was a powerful experience for me. I didn't have to leave my office. It was a phone call, it wasn't even a Zoom call, but the amount of throughput that we're going to be able to do with in-person and telematics is changing, not going to change, is clearly changing the healthcare landscape. So we're moving to a consumer-driven, intelligent consumer device-enabled health services market, well outside traditional medtech, biopharma, and life sciences. This is scaring the heck out of the large strategics. The large strategics for a long time have had a major stake in the ground, and their pure mass and ability to distribute their products and services and factories and manufacturing capabilities have been very difficult for anybody to scale the walls on. And now there are new value props coming in that will include a heavy digital push. And I'm not talking about digital on the robotics side. The large strategics are going to own that robotics market. That's not going to change. But the tails for today, the tails on that large distribution curve, those outlier companies that are outside of the strategics who own that critical mass are going to be the biggest threat to the strategics, because those outliers are these pure digital SaaS-related patient monitoring, passive patient monitoring, consumer monitoring plays. And right now, those are not in the playbook of any strategics. They do not have the in-house expertise nor the culture to cultivate those, nor the expertise on the talent side. And so you're going to start to see these outside tails, these extremes creep in and substantially threaten within the next 5 years the current standard of care and the large strategics. So as mentioned, a push into health rather than a pull into treatment. Right? We've got a connectivity right now with our mobile devices. We've got a connectivity with low-cost razor blade monitoring capabilities within a household on these chronic patients. We've never been able to have such an invasive opportunity right now in a work-from-home environment. This is setting up as a perfect storm of opportunity. That perfect storm is we have now allowed the entire world to come into our house, whether it's these gyms that people are mounting on their walls, whether it's the Peloton that they're allowing people in their houses digitally. We were allowing other devices by Google and Apple in our houses and joking about them, and now it's become everyday current standard of behavior, now becoming everyday current standard of care. So home and remote care. Genetics loads the gun, lifestyle and environment fire it. I look at this, and so do some of the advanced medtech, health tech companies that are on the horizon right now, 3 categories: hindsight, insight, and foresight. And let me break those down for you very basically. Hindsight is something like a genetic predisposition, the 23andMe test. Every one of us knows that, and probably half of us in the audience have taken that. While it's not the platinum standard, it's a close enough standard and something we've become accustomed to and interested in. And we're willing to give away our genetic information that's been gamified to us, and very few people cared about it for health. And when we give out this information, we can, with a relatively accurate level, see what we're predisposed for. And the cost of genetic testing at a consumer level is dropping almost like a Moore's law, and the capabilities are escalating at a very rapid rate. So that's one. What am I predisposed for? The second thing that's happening now is we've allowed the doors of our homes and our lives to become open. And we have allowed data gathering to take place in the form of intelligent consumer devices. Fitbits, Garmin's are just 2 examples of what you can buy over the counter. I'm not even getting into the iRhythm devices and some of the other FDA cleared devices. But highly accurate, excellent data sets that allow us to have insight from heart rate, lung volume, O2 levels, respiration rate. These are all providing insights into, again, chronic and just general monitoring of a healthy person. And then foresight. The amount of information coming in right now, the use of machine learning, AI, narrow AI, let's not get worried about AI in general, but narrow AI as applied to these data sets and what we're predisposed for is setting up a really interesting health tech, med tech market. This will happen. I talked about this about 5 years ago before all this started to converge. This is very real. I had imagined my 1-year-old son, recently born, be able to get a blood pull, a genetic test. And when that happens, I knew what he was predisposed for. At that point, I imagined a Band-Aid that would have sensors on it that at $30 a month I could prescribe for. That Band-Aid would sit on him. Every 30 days I'd replace it. As I replace it, the data every single night, every single day was being logged into a receiver somewhere in the house. We know what he was predisposed for based upon all the gifts and curses my previous generations gave him. And now what we would be able to do is through massive data sets, be able to track that person every single day and watch when we started, determined by the data sets, when he started to fall out of an acceptable control limit and or trend started taking place by the biometrics converging and allowing a predictive analytics to occur. It will set off an alarm somewhere in that ecosystem. He then will be able to go to a specialist based upon whatever it was. Maybe it was predisposed for being a diabetic. Maybe it was congestive heart failure. Maybe it was a neurological. Maybe it was mental health even, based upon certain things. And now you start to triangulate gut biomes. Kohler now has an angle to healthcare. They have a large R&D effort going on between urinalysis and gut biome on fecal matter in a toilet, intelligent toilets, and I'm going to cut into that in a couple minutes. But you can see where this passive patient monitoring is entering into this environment. So the intelligent consumer products in the health tech space. Personal health tech was already surging with wearable fitness before this whole coronavirus. It was a $10 billion industry, $10 billion on passive consumer fitness trackers. This transformation plays out in our homes, our workplaces, our car or gymnasiums, rather than the hospital that is sitting in the middle of town like a people factory on a brick building, this monolithic structure. That is starting to find the fault lines in it from a cost and value of care perspective. So we've got thermometers, blood oximetry monitors, heart rate monitors, Fitbits, sleep monitoring devices, smart toothbrushes, smart toilets, all being integrated into our lives. In the past, when we've had a self-diagnosis, we were calling it Dr. Google, and people were laughed at, and they should have been, because they were self-diagnosing online by what their fears were. We've all done that. We've all had an ache, a pain, a mark, a growth. We went online, and all of us were going to be on that fast track to dying and leaving behind our loved ones. And while those were built upon fears, we could now build these suppositions upon data. And you will have 4 or 5, I'm counting right now, organizations right now that will be a subscription model for individuals who are willing to pay a certain amount per year in a concierge service on a home monitoring based upon critical biometrics as data points. And so you're going to have, there's a whole social issue with that, I know, the haves and the have-nots, but that is a service that's coming out right now, being supported by VC. So a global health crisis may prove to be the catalyst to demonstrate just how healthcare delivery can move from an inconvenient, disconnected delivery system in century-old behavior. And if you look at our healthcare continuum, that's really what it is. Not much has changed in the last 125 years on how we are treated. We go to, again, a monolithic structure in the middle of town, and we wait in line like an assembly line, and we move through that in an analog fashion. And there's very little, less than 1/10 of 1% have ongoing monitoring going on. It's usually in the cardiac function. Evidence of this: Teladoc, Livongo, InTouch, the 3 of those. This was an $18 billion acquisition that right now, I believe, last time I checked, had a market cap of nearly $30 billion. A market cap of $30 billion in the medtech industry puts it inside the top 25 medtech companies, where up till just maybe 3 years ago, Teladoc was not even on anybody's radar screen. There's a lot of evidence pointing to that because that's where the money is. So let's look at the economics of this. There's been a lot of suppressed revenue delayed over clinical trials, disjointed R&D efforts in the emerging health tech market. We couldn't do clinical trials. We were stuck with hospitals being shut down, access points. From that, the ASC, the ambulatory surgical center model, has exploded. You can follow the stats on that. I meant to pull them for today, but the amount of services that are being pushed out of the centralization of the hospital to ASCs, to these focus factories, has been substantial. Ernst & Young 2021 Firepower Report. MedTech fundamentals, M&A in 2021, 2022 is going to be on fire. You have a lot of these analog medical device companies, these, again, I'm going to call them out, J&J, Boston Sci, Medtronic, as the big, Baxter. These big players, that the lion's share of their business is in a commodities type business and not a digital centric business, is going to be aggressively moving into more of that digital domain, and that's outside of robotics. Those big companies are not going to get, outside of Intuitive and a Census, a soft tissue robot as an example, into the market before 24, 25 at best. The ortho market's different, and that also sets up for the ambulatory surgical centers. The ortho market has got an array of surgical robotic platforms. The ortho market is first in exploding into the ambulatory surgical center market. And that debundling is going to be something that all these large strategics are going to watch unwind, as you can no longer give the robot for free and look for the bundling for the multi-million-dollar contracts into the hospital setting. Those are the canary in the coal mine on behaviors moving forward. The next 2 years, major co-investments, major acquisitions by the mid-caps and strategics, the big players, blue chips, in the digital leaning field, where it probably won't even be an FDA-regulated device. So setting aside diligence and closing deals virtually, which really hampered MedTech quite a bit, the buyers have been on the sideline with suppressed cash. And enter another vehicle. Those that have been studying the market, we've seen the emergence of the SPAC market. And the SPAC market is going to spin and bring to market with large cash organizations that might or might not have either gone public previously or are going to bypass the large strategics for an acquisition. So your average SPAC is somewhere around 150 to, I think Ishrak's is right around $800 million. So you're now going to start to see these privately held companies. They're usually going to be on the right side, the correct side of profit, are now going to start to get picked up and brought out into the public markets. And they're going to be revenue generating, which means if they're making something, you've got distribution channels, sales channels, manufacturing channels at scale, big market coming out. And some of these SPACs are going to go out in a pure digital play. And I'm going to give you an example. A company like Bright Insight, write that down if you're not familiar. It was a spin-off out of Flex. And they're an exact example of what supply chain looks like in another way moving forward. Bright Insight, basically, really fundamental here, came out of Flex, which all of you are familiar with Flex, came out of Flex, and is now a contract manufacturer purely on the digital side of things. So they are creating a cloud environment for connectivity from anything from a startup to a pharmaceutical to a biotech that wants to send data up to a cloud to have something done with it. And so think of these medical device companies are not capable of building their own cloud, nor should they be in the cloud business. It's too dense of a skill set required, and to keep the gray hats and black hats out of there, as well as have the latest expertise, it is not a core competency, nor is it a culture of any of the large strategics. But it certainly is a culture of the Amazons, the Googles, the Apples, the Samsungs. And so you're going to have these companies like Bright Insight come in. They're going to change the definition of supply chain because the product, in some cases, we're moving is data. So these SPACs are going to be cutting into the private equity money. These SPACs are going to be cutting into the VC money because they're going to offer a faster track to exit by these players, and also professional management teams that were not there before. That is going to be an incredibly interesting dynamic to watch. And I believe the supply chain side of consulting is probably seeing the best days ahead of it. So if you're in that area of your career that you're currently a consultant, or you're thinking about exiting with your package after 25 years, there's never been a better time to start to look at the market, because all of these companies are going to need to get expertise on the supply chain side as they come up against the big players. 2020 set up the market with big players having cash, small players needing cash, usually a buyer's market if it's based on dollars alone. But again, the wild card is the acceleration of tech and digital and health tech, and new players outside of health tech coming in. As I mentioned, the Googles, Amazons, again, Samsungs, Teladocs, some of the others. So the big players are going to make multiple bets. The big strategics are going to make multiple bets so they don't miss the land grab. Because the land grab on digital happens very quickly. If you're in the digital game, you can scale extraordinarily quickly and drive that adoption utilization. And the second movers in most digital domains might as well be in last place. So in that front, you're going to see the strategics dropping major money, major bets, or co-investments in a lot of these digital plays because they can't afford to be out of it. Classically, VC has been early stage investing, managing clinical and regulatory risk. They have moved into some of these digital focused technologies, but again, it takes a long time for them. And there are anywhere from 10 to 15 bets that they have to make sometimes on a single digital domain, because in the digital, not everybody's going to be right, which is interesting. But if you looked at structural heart, there's probably 30 plus investments in that area. And because it's a procedure, and because it's a little more art than science in regards to performing the procedure, there's room for probably 10 to 12 players in there. And I don't think we're going to have that in the digital domain. And some of these, as I said, on the tail right now, but eventually will be center stage. And then PE traditional has been focused on revenue, but I'm watching them get in earlier and earlier now in the investment process with roll-ups. So that's very interesting. And I'm also seeing PE firms like KKR are quietly performing roll-ups right now on clinical trial organizations. So keep an eye on that. SPACs, the disruption in the market. I think $15 billion in the first quarter of Q1 in SPAC money. Those are blank checks, and they have up to 24 months to pull the trigger on that. So it'll be interesting to start watching, especially in the first half of 2021. There's going to be a lot of movement because they're going to have to de-SPAC and go to a publicly traded company. That is going to open up opportunities. Not everything SPAC is digital, so there are large investments being made right now in organizations that are going to be built to scale up. I think over the last 10 years, we've seen that middle ground, what we used to call mezzanine companies, suffer in that market. I think you're going to see a resurgence of those mezzanine companies come in with a specialization that will be able to, due to the decentralization outside of hospitals, the emergence of off-hospital healthcare provisions, you're going to start to see that mezzanine level companies come back into play rather than just be startups and the large strategics in general. We talked about the brick megastructures in the middle of town. You're going to start to have that decentralization of health clinics, urgent care centers, and ASCs as focus factories. Interventional cardiology, orthopedic, peripheral vascular, women's health, men's health. That decentralization is going to throw a wrench in the distribution channel of the large strategics who have enjoyed, for the most part, being able to be a bully on the playground. That's not meant to be negative by any sense, but they have been able to be the tail that wags the dog across the border. We will be monitored homes, cars, workplaces. We'll shift the focus from acute treatment mindset to prevention and early intervention. COVID has shaken up a lot of the population. I heard one of the gentlemen from Price Waterhouse say that we have a short memory. We do. But what we don't have a short memory on is allowing these digital components and digital entities into our home. We're not suddenly going to open the front door and throw all these digital engaged sort of thoroughfares out the door. It's over. iPhone has already been insinuated into our lives. All this monitoring, it's insinuated into our lives behaviorally. So what are the pitfalls? Consumer products typically move fast. So as you look at these non-medtech companies getting into the medtech market, they have a consumer product mindset, and they're able to get out to the market with an MVP, a minimal viable product, and iterate on that. You can't play that game with an FDA involved. Now, the other side of that coin is a large part of this emerging health tech market is going to be non-FDA regulated devices. Having said that, they're going to have close enough quality of data that will, again, get inserted into the health tech continuum for the empowered patient. And it's important that you don't overlay the current workflow in the healthcare system and jam the future of digital in there. I do believe you're going to see a major retrofit over the next 5 years in the healthcare connectivity of the consumer, not the patient. It's the same person, but it's before it becomes a patient, and the management of health. Patient health records, data collection, privacy issues, and cyber issues. This is a sticky one. Where we will land in regards to data, devices, diagnostics between morals and ethics, that's up for grabs. I do know, however, if you've ever had a major health scare in your life, I've had one, and you're able to share your data with that patient population moving forward to help somebody else, you will give away your data. There will be a cohort of the population that's going to say, I'm not going to give my data. There are countries who are doing it very successfully, like Israel, who have done a tremendous job over the last 15 years of using the patient population of their data in order to empower healthcare and treatment in their country. And it's an interesting model to examine. So I think we will have challenges there. I do think we will have overarching legislation from the federal government, but that will be more for agitation and posturing than for the goodness of the patient personally.